And, and I do it I wander around the house from my library to my office. If the dog, last night I did one and the puppies got into the act, so they made their debut on Zoom because I couldn't keep them quiet. But at noon I was in my library and my husband had created a new internet network and forgot to tell me. So I had this terrible wobble in my Zoom, but fortunately Brad Thor saved the day. Oh, you did? Well, I'm certainly happy I've been chattering away here for everybody. So, right. So, Ace, you want to come and join me since apparently I'm conducting my own show?
I was waiting for the grand entrance with the music.
Well,
I was waiting. I was waiting for the Spenser for Hire theme. There we go.
Yeah. Well, I was saying, and I said to you, I wish we had cake because this is a very special Spenser. Robert B. Parker's Bye Bye Baby. 50th Spenser. I read them in real time. How does that make me feel?
Did you really start back in the early 70s? And you started from
in the early 70s. I was 35, so it was really hard for me to be reading Spenser.
Yeah.
No, I did. I actually read the Godwalk Manuscript, as it published.
That's great.
All kinds of authors. Tony Hillerman, Michael, you.
Yeah.
God, when did we do Crossroad Blues? Come on, how long ago was that?
No, 5 years ago. I've only been doing this for a little while. I'm trying to age like Spenser does.
Just because he writes fiction doesn't mean he can lie to you right here.
So, when that book came out with Godwolf, when did you become like a big crime reader? I mean, have you been?
Oh, I'd always been. My mother was a mystery fan, so I grew up. I mean, I was probably 8 years old when I was trying to figure out, the mean streets of Raymond Chandler and whatever. I mean, the reason this started as a mystery bookstore, even though it hasn't been just a mystery bookstore for at least 20 years, was my mom, because she lived here, she and my father. And I thought it would be a sort of a fun thing for us to do together when I started the store. So the original Poison Pen, none of the shelves were taller than I, because my mom was my size. So, gradually we acquired tall guys that work here, but for a long time we didn't have anybody that was tall. So everything was in the little 600 square feet over on Main Street. Everything was that height. Anyway, I remember the Godwalk Manuscript, and it was quite slender. If any of you remember reading it, I mean, it was not, what was it, like 190 pages, maybe 200 pages? I mean,
just a perfect format for those. I guess it was a Berkeley paperback. I can't remember.
No, it was a hardcover.
Well, no. When I'm thinking about that series when it came out, that's how I read them in paperbacks. But yeah, no, I think all those, like the first 10, 12 books, were very slender. Mm-hmm. And I think it was only when he came to Putnam in the early to mid 80s did the books get a little thicker. I don't know if necessarily they got longer, but they got thicker.
Well, what happened was that books were, I mean, this is really technical. We'll talk about this book in a minute. Books were not this size. Books were 10 inches tall. They were not 12 inches tall. And so Gary would know that because Gary is a book collector and so forth. So they were short.
Yeah.
And it was the advent of Barnes and Noble. I mean, this is a true story, that got publishers to start making big books because Barnes and Noble said that big books displayed better and page out. And so what happened with Parker, he didn't actually write longer books, but what they did was they made, remember, huge margins?
Yeah.
I mean, he was economical.
The font got bumped up considerably.
The font got bigger, the margins got bigger, there was more material, but Bob himself did not, grow more verbose. In fact, if anything, he grew less verbose.
Yeah, yeah. I'd like to say that in some kind of ways he was kind of like Hammett that way. That Hammett, a friend of mine who's a big, very well-read crime guy, said that Hammett just, kept on getting more hard-boiled and getting more spear in his prose and more spear in his prose until finally Hammett had nothing left to say. He was done. And I think Bob could do things just very economically, and especially towards the end. He just really, but it was great. Some people complained the books were too short or they didn't, were long enough, but he was just such a lovely writer that, each page was just a delight to read.
And he was always dialogue heavy, and he told me once that, one of his secrets of his great dialogue is that it was the only verb he ever used was said, no matter what it was. How are you today? He said. He didn't whatever it is. So he kept it short. I think Some of the banter between Hawk and Spencer is some
Yeah.
of the great dialogue, and it
Oh,
was
for sure. Absolutely.
no extra
Yeah.
words in it. But Bob himself could be kind of different. Some of you might have heard me tell this story, but it's the last time Bob was here because unfortunately, he had his health kind of got wrecked. He had surgery and it didn't go well, and so he stopped the last few years of his life. He didn't go on book tour.
Mm.
So the last time he was here was the year that the Mystery Writers of America um, had chosen him to be the Grand Master. I don't think he'd ever. Did he ever win an Edgar? I think
No,
the
I don't think
Grand
so.
Master
No.
was
Yeah.
because
Yeah. He was like
okay.
kind of like Cary Grant of the.
Yeah, he was.
Never.
Went on forever. So Bob didn't like to tour, but he loved coming here. He liked the Biltmore. We'd go out and we'd drink at the bar. I'd get him all oiled up. We'd have and so he was here, and he was notorious for doing like 30 or 40 minutes, and then he was done. He just wanted to be out of here, right? So I would coax him along. But anyway, on this particular night, we'd had maybe an extra drink, and he was all arranged around the room. We had a huge crowd, and Bob was really mellow. And we started out. He smiled at everybody, and he said, "You can all call me Grandmaster Bob," he said. And then he went on, and at 8:30, an hour and a half into it, I finally said to him, "Bob, maybe we need to pause and sign books and so forth." "Oh," he said, looking kind of depressed. So we did, and it went on till after 10 or something. So when I wrote Putnam the next day to recount this, and they wrote back and they said, "You must have had some other Robert B. Parker." That's a poison
Well, and I know
pen.
he really liked coming here. I think this is like
He did, he loved it.
when the tours got shorter and he really didn't have to do them. I know that he always came out here because I was with Putnam for at least 5-6 years while he was still alive, and he would tour just do these little tours, but he would always come here.
He
So
did. And part of it was we had a bond because grew up in Chicago, so I was a Cubs fan, and of course was a Red Sox fan. And I remember one of the last things I said to him in our last live event was, I said to you, "Do you think either one of us will ever live long enough to see our team win a World Series?" And we both went, "No." And he did live long enough to see, the Red
Yeah.
Sox win the series. And eventually I lived long enough
Yeah,
to
to
see
see.
the Cubs. I know. So
I don't know when that's going to happen again, Barbara. That's going to be
I
quite some
know,
time.
but I think that was part of the bond was
Yeah.
that we had baseball as well as Spencer. But reading him in real time, my favorite Spencer, I've told this, I don't ace this many times, is Mortal Stakes, the third book, and that's the
That's
one
a
about the
terrific-
baseball player.
Terrific book.
And it was the one where I didn't think there was any way that Bob was going to get out of the jam that he created for the characters. I mean, it seemed to me all the way through, it was impossible for this book to end well.
Of course, that book now was about a baseball player whose wife has basically a sex tape, or back then it was a sex film. Now that would only be enhancing the career of that baseball player. That's like, it'd be like, "We got a sex tape of your wife." You'd be like, "Okay, well, let's get some money for it." So it'd be more of a negotiation necessarily than a,
Some of the great motives for crime fiction have been blown apart by technology,
yeah.
but some of them have been blown apart by the absence of shame. Shame used to be it really was
No,
a big
for
driver.
sure.
If you read Agatha Christie, people's reputations, they didn't want to be shamed in the village or shamed in their family, whatever. Now, it's like, no kidding, people exploit
Yeah.
it. So as a writer, I mean, not so much in the Parker, because you do have to stay in the Parker universe, but in your Quinn Coulson books. And by the way, I'm holding up the most recent one,
Thank
which
you.
is called The Heathens, and we sold out of it last summer. So if anybody missed it, I got some more so Ace could sign them,
Great.
which will be great. But
I think certainly like shame and honor and those type of things. Those are not necessarily plentiful things these days. Things that people would normally be embarrassed about are certain types of behavior. But I think that's a core part of the Spencer books and a core part of what Parker talked about. I mean, his badge of honor and decency. And I think that's why these books are lasting. I mean, we're sitting here 50 years later. This is the 50th book, and it's no accident. It's because he created a character. I think we want to believe that within the darkness there are people of honor and decency, and they live by, as Parker famously wrote, by a code. And the code could be code between a cop and a criminal, but they know what the code is and they know the line not to cross. And that stuff is in shorter supply these days. And I think that that's what draws me to these books anyway.
Well, you could go all the way back to the whole deal about whether the private eye novel emerged from the Western hero, when we ran out of the West, because the real great American private eye novel started in California with Chandler and Hammett. But a private eye's loyalty is basically to his client. He doesn't have to obey the police procedure rules. See that? Well, in fact, in this book, you've got, you've got bad guys and you've got the Boston cops, but one or two of them have dropped off over the years, right?
It changed up a little bit. I mean, that's been kind of the trick is when I first started writing these books 10 years ago was how do you keep it the same, but then keep it fresh? And it was a delicate kind of balancing act because I don't think anyone wanted to see the books completely reimagined and viewed in a different way and have this character different. But yeah, I played a little bit with the police department and gave a few promotions and a few demotions and just had to
and a couple of deaths, and not only them, but among the Boston, mafia kind of people, a few of them went dead along the way too. And in fact, we do have a family in this book.
That's right. Yeah.
Comes in. However, people like Henry Simone, he's still at the gym. I mean, he might be 109, but he's still, working out as though he.
I kind of did a little. I think with Spenser, when I first started writing these books, it's kind of like getting a car and rolling back the odometer a little bit. I rolled back the odometer just a little bit with Spenser so we could do that. Because as we've said, I think I've said every visit here, is the only thing the family asked me to do is, and his editor, Chris Pepe, who had been his editor for years, said that what they really wanted me to do is make sure that I kept everything contemporary. And they felt that a great part of the success of the Spenser books is that they are of the time. And so at the time, I really wanted to write something in the 70s. I wanted to write about Spenser and Hawke back in the gritty old dirty Boston days, but which I think would have been a hell of a lot of fun. But I think that ultimately they were right. I think that's been the key to the success of the stories.
And not only has Spenser had to be contemporary, but Boston has changed a lot.
Oh yeah.
And so you've had to keep up. In fact, when I was last in Boston, I wanted to, a little Spenser kind of a thing. And, I don't think Lockover is there anymore at the restaurant.
It's funny, Locks closed about 2 weeks after I started writing Spenser.
Oh.
And
I mean, come on, it's
and
a
that's
pilgrimage.
and that's about the most Spenserian location that there was to go to Lockover, which used to be an all men's club for ever.
Indeed so. And then, he and Susan would drink in the hotel was changed.
Yeah.
What's it called now?
Oh, the Charles Hotel.
Okay.
Yeah, or you're talking about the Ritz.
I'm talking about the Ritz. But
well, see, the Ritz, so funny is like Bob had nostalgia for the time when he first started writing, and he'd always call it the old Ritz bar, but in fact the hotel had become the Taj. It was now the Taj Hotel. But now it's something completely different. And I mentioned that in the book, is the bar used to be the Ritz, and then it became the Taj, and now it's something else, but it'll always be the Ritz to Spenser. But Boston, you see those little places. When I first started writing these books, my way of working was to fly up and go meet with Joan. And I'd go have dinner with Joan, and we'd have these 4-hour dinners, and you knew Joan, and we'd have these long talks and drinks and talk about the new book. And then also I worked with a guy named Mel Farman, who was Bob's best friend for over 50 years, who was just an amazing guy. And but I'd always land at Logan, go check into my hotel, and then go over to Legal Seafood over in Cambridge, where Bob would sit at the end of the bar. And forever there was a little plaque at the end of the bar that said, "This seat is reserved for Robert B. Parker and his alter ego Spenser." And the first night that we were up there drinking with Mel and Joan, as they said, "Go sit in the seat." And I said, "I can't do it." I said, I can't go sit in the seat. It's just, that's too special of a place. But as time marches on, that Legal Seafood just closed last year. And so the place where he used to go and meet his buddy Mel for over, 20 years to go have a Friday night dinner and have a drink, it's gone. But we were able to, through a friend, actually Mel's widow, I got the plaque that was on the end of the bar. They were tearing up the bar and they were removing everything, so I got that. But yeah, Spenser, Boston changes, but Spenser stays the same.
He does. But I thought it was handy that you put a map in this book.
Yeah, there's been maps.
I know,
Yeah.
but this one in particular, I found myself, tracing Spenser's office and the hotel and, all the rest of it.
Yeah.
I mean, because part of the fun of the Spensers was also touring Boston.
Oh, for sure.
And surrounding areas. I don't know Boston that well, but I felt like through Spenser, I had a much greater acquaintance with Boston than I would ever have otherwise had.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's a great thing about Boston is you can easily do a self-guided Spenser tour. And you can go check out all the restaurants, and you can go and see where his apartment is, and you can go see where his office is, and at Berkeley and Boylston Street. And the wonderful thing about Boston, it's such a, small town, small city, that you can walk almost everywhere. And, if you're
Yeah.
strolling over that wonderful bridge that Bob wrote about countless times, and I've written about it countless times, in the public garden over where the
Right.
swan boats go.
The
And it's
swan boats,
it's an
yeah.
amazing place, and it's a very, I see why he loved the city so much, and that's such a huge part of everything in there. And I did, over the years, I have tried to update the map. Lockover is
Right.
no longer on it, and certain restaurants and places have gone the wayside.
Yeah, there's a certain Sherlock Holmes echo there, 2221B Baker Street. I
Yeah.
mean, there are people who go to London and
Yeah, I think there are people that go to, I would love to see it. That it's a beautiful old building that Berkeley and Boylston, it's called the Berkeley Building, and it looks like it's an Art Nouveau building built in the teens, 20s, just beautiful. Looks like something obviously from another age. And I really think the city of Boston should put a plaque there for tourists to come see it.
one of those
maybe
white
they
and
will.
blue plaque, historic plaque things.
Yeah,
Yeah,
little
that'd be great.
literary landmark. I'd love to
Agatha
see it.
Christie lived here. Why not have Spenser lived here?
No,
Yeah.
Bob deserves it. He's created something that's lasted and lasted. So I'd love to see that. That's part of the thing I was so serious about doing over these last 10 years, is making sure that I kept the legacy alive. And I'm sure there'll be countless authors writing about characters and spin-offs and that kind of thing for years to come. But, I didn't want to be the guy who screwed it up.
No.
So I wanted to keep it going, for 10 years. And now, now it's up to other people to do it. But it was, it was a joy jumping into it, because Joan was still alive, and Mel was still alive, and working with his editor, and our friend Michael Barson, and it was just the old team.
It was the old team.
Well,
Chris Pepe was still there. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I know.
His agent, who had been his agent, Helen Brand, forever. It was just all that
And
kind of
Bob's
stuff.
boys are still alive, aren't they? His two
Oh, yeah,
sons.
yeah.
One thing I most loved about Bob is both his sons were gay. And Bob, is this big, whatever it is, and he was always so proud of them. I think, isn't it the fourth book with a young man that comes in? I always kind of
That's early
autumn.
Early autumn. Yeah.
right.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm not saying I can't even remember whether he was gay or not. Doesn't
Yeah.
really matter. But Bob was always so proud of his boys.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think that's one of the threads that he did in all his books, talking about like honor and decency, and that's part of the core of these books. And when Bob was writing about gay characters, or having a gay cop like Lee Farrell or kind of stuff, that was pretty, edgy for the time. Yeah, it was something that I don't think that was necessarily welcomed by hard-boiled detective readers. But he wrote about these things, and he wrote about race, and he wrote a book like, which I think is one of the best ones, Looking for Rachel Wallace, which is terrific, about this, feminist lesbian author who's got, is got death threats against her, and that was a huge inspiration for this book. And it's just, again, finding like a person, it's not really a political issue. It's really the through line that I think that goes from Godwolf through the end of Bob's career to the new books is hopefully the great amount of decency that Spenser represents.
Yeah, and he established Hawk and wrote about Hawk as a white man writing a black man, and that would be much harder to do today. When this quest for authenticity. I mean, I thought about when Tony Hillerman's biographer was here. We talked about that. Would Tony actually have done well
Yeah.
with the Navajo books
Yeah.
today? Because there's this pressure now that you have to be what you're writing.
Yeah. Hawk is such a terrific
Fabulous.
character, and I think Bob created that character really obviously from his heart, and had so much. There were different people I've met over the years, or the last 10 years, of who was Hawk. Was there really a guy who was Hawk? And somebody said there was a guy who was a football player. But I think, again, when you talk about a guy writing, really, which was somewhat of a very local book in 1973, I guess around 74, 75, when Promised Land came out and you had Hawk come in the story, to have, we see it all the time in movies, to have a black guy and a white guy team up. I mean, we've seen it 1,000 times. But back then, Boston was such a hotbed of racial strife that was going on. And to have this was a really big statement for him to make. Now it seems kind of a commonplace idea, but when Bob did this in the early 70s, particularly in Boston at that time, it was a pretty powerful message. And I think it's been another one of his very cool through lines. And one of the most, Hawk is one of the most popular characters in detective fiction.
Bob didn't care a lot about what other people thought. He was a big guy. I have some photos that I'm trying to remember. A really nice man who wrote a book with Tess Gerritsen. I'm going completely blank on his name. Apologies if you're watching this. Sent me some pictures of himself and Bob when they were in college, and they're running. They're out running along, and Bob is, in his shorts and his
Yeah.
running outfit and all, and they're jogging along somewhere in Boston. I could hardly believe it.
Well,
It
Bob
was
was,
so
I get,
cool.
it is, especially in the 70s, he had some health problems. He had a bad knee. He had some things that happened. But, he was he was a very athletic guy. He considered
Yeah.
himself first and foremost like what you used to call a jock. And he was an athlete, and he, wasn't just a fan, but one of the first books he ever published was a book on weightlifting. I have a copy of it. It was for the Time Life book series written by him and by Parker and a friend of his named John Marsh. And they did this book called, the key fundamentals of weightlifting or whatever, and he loved it. He ran and lifted weights, and that was a big part of his life, just like Spenser.
Have you taken his advice? Have you practiced it, weightlifting?
What do you think, Barbara?
Well, I
Come
thought,
on.
it seemed to me you're in such tip-top shape. Of course you did. I was looking up is Walking Shadow the one where he and Hawk are in the sort of an Asian section?
Yes, yeah.
I
That's in
think that
Chinatown.
the dialogue in Walking Shadow between Hawk and Spenser, I've never forgotten it. I mean, it's
That's
just
a great one.
no kidding.
Oh, yeah.
I've always thought that duet was just astonishing.
And also like a little corner of Boston that he had never written about,
yeah,
and
that
then
I didn't know
to
about.
go into Chinatown, and then to have that kind of, you learn so much about the city. And I think that's one of the greatest things. Many things are great things about crime fiction, but one of the things I love about crime fiction is getting to explore a world. And I think actually years ago, I got to meet Anthony Bourdain, and he loved crime fiction. He loved crime novels. And he said when he was going to a city, he didn't care if it was Havana, he didn't care if it was Detroit, he would find out who was the most popular crime fiction author of that area, and that's how he learned about the city best. And I thought that's great. That's exactly, like nobody else.
Right up there somewhere, because you remember he actually wrote the mystery.
Yeah, that's
He
right.
did. Yeah, he was here. That's the one time he was ever here. So we have.
I
his
mentioned that to
picture.
him when I was having dinner with him, and he kind of said, "Oh, wasn't that good?" Or he was a huge Elmore Leonard fan. He loved Elmore Leonard. Yeah,
It really was.
nice man.
All right, so let's talk about Bye Bye Baby.
All right.
This is your 10th Spenser. What you just sort of mentioned inspirations, so expound on that.
Well, I think for this one, again, keeping things contemporary, trying to write about something that, is happening in Boston, happening in the rest of the country. We're not, all of us watch the news, all of us read the newspaper, and, you see the huge amount of hatred and, decent sentiment that is out there. And you see these groups like, the Proud Boys and all those, can I say assholes, and, and I thought this is the perfect group for 2020, 2022 for Spenser and Hawk to deal with. And I just thought this was really of the time, and the way that Spenser would have encountered, different types of, religious leaders back in the 70s, and, crooked congressmen at that time, and that kind of thing. I just thought that story, writing about, white supremacist, I thought I really want to see Spenser and Hawk deal with
Take
these
it
people.
on.
Yeah.
Right. So who is the baby in the book?
Who is the
Bye
who's the
Baby is
Bye Bye
what you
Baby?
call it. Yeah.
I think that's more of a kind of, this is, as many of you know, this is my last book, so I think in some ways it's more of my message to the fans.
Symbolic title.
Yeah, a little symbolic. I thought I'm a sucker for nice round numbers, and this is number 10 and number 50, and I thought this is a good time for me to
Well,
get off the train.
CGR, some of you will realize that this is probably AOC in disguise. So
a little bit of both, not necessarily.
Yeah.
I use that name, but a lot of Ayanna Pressley, who is the congresswoman currently in Boston, who represents the
really?
greater district. Yeah, a lot of her policies, and a lot of what's going on there, and kind of a mixture of several current political figures.
So, but she's the one it allows you to call her CGR instead.
Oh, sure. I just
right,
like the,
which is
I like the
really
sound of that.
So Spenser is hired basically by her chief of staff, to run security because she's been having threats from what.
We don't know. Well, we don't know, but you can imagine
sure.
where it's going. That was always the thing with the Spenser book is not as much mystery. We kind of know about a third of halfway through it who the bad guys are. It's mainly a question of how this is all going to come to a head. So there are a lot of different forces that are against this woman. You know, in Boston, the biggest thing for like a Democratic challenger in that city would be another, like an incumbent having to face another Democrat in the primaries that are coming up. And during that time, during the primaries in Boston, is when all these death threats are coming in. And one of the things I was very inspired about when writing this book, I thought about some of these people that are in Congress that don't just get a death threat here or there, but they get hundreds of death threats every day, and some of these violent things that are said. I mean, I've overheard people talking on the plane and saying these outrageous things, and then again, it goes back to that the question of honor and decency, and whether you believe in somebody's politics or don't like it or whatever, just the fact that this type of behavior is becoming more normalized these days, and again. That's, I think, the reason why popular fiction, or what you can do as far as something, with a hero, and hopefully doing the right thing, and bring to the table of having some kind of code.
So you might imagine that the FBI, I mean, I'm not sure, I think you touch on it, but if you're running for office, you don't think you're entitled to protection.
Yeah, you're not. You're
she's
not.
running for re-election.
And that
right?
was actually, I'm really glad you said that, because that's true. Is you'd think that if you are a senator, or congressman, a congresswoman, that you have the ability, if somebody's given death threats against you, to have personal protection during this time. But you don't. You are relied of wherever your home base is, especially if you're coming home to campaign in your district.
Right.
You have to supply your own. And that was one of the things, again, that I was like, boy, this is a perfect Spenser novel, is that she would have to hire out and have somebody local to help her.
Except she didn't want to hire out. She does not want to do this. It's her chief of staff that comes to Spenser. And of course, he then brings in Hawk. But the FBI, when something occurs, they think that they should be a piece of this. And so there's always that conflict with different, in this case, it's not the cops versus the FBI, it's Spenser versus the FBI. But we know he has a history of both being in league with and in conflict with the Boston police.
Sure, absolutely.
And so, but now we get the FBI guy. But then you have to begin to wonder if there's somebody on her staff who may be a problem, because there seems to be some kind of information leakage going on.
Yeah.
So, and also you have to think about it seems to be more and more common that where you would have thought that the cops were not the source of leaks, in fact, they often can be.
Oh, for sure.
And so I think in Los Angeles is like a norm thing, for the LAPD or something, to be a source of constant information.
Some of my best stories that when I was a newspaper reporter writing about cops, were cops dropping the dime on other cops. So sometimes it depends. You got a lot of blood feuds that go in those systems.
Well, but there's stuff like crime scene photos and information that can be leaked out, and money changing hands. I wonder if Bitcoins is going to make that even easier. No, I'm serious. Even easier, harder to trace payoffs and whatever. Did you see that Turkey is thinking about, going to Bitcoin as a national? And isn't the Fed here, our Fed?
I'm putting all my money
in
I'm putting all my money in those NFTs.
Right.
With the little artwork of cartoon things.
It's just too hard for me to go there. I just
I think it's kind of a modern equivalent of like Beanie Babies. I remember when people were investing in Beanie Babies because they thought they were going to become millionaires. So
that's right.
A word to the wise for sure.
I know it.
Oh, I think that's a wise investment.
Yeah, bourbon makes more sense than.
But the problem is I would drink all my investments, so that's would last very long.
Yeah. So, which Boston comp is on the scene in this book?
Well, one of the things that I've changed and again, I really came to writing Spenser because Chris Pepe and I were talking about how to deal with Spenser in the modern world, and she wasn't particularly keen on a lot of my references as far as old movies and songs from the 30s and 40s, and she said you really can update those if you want to, but to me that really is what made Spenser Spenser. And so there's a great film of The Long Goodbye with Elliot Gould. And in that, really the premise Robert Altman wanted Gould to do is he said, you're playing Marlowe as if Marlowe stepped out of 1940 and he's just in 1970. He called it Rip Van Marlowe. And that's how I look at Spenser. Spenser is still the same Spenser from the 70s of that time, but we're just, he's living by the same code. He still has the same likes, the same interest, and that's the way he's living his life. But anyway, I'm sorry, your question about?
My story.
Oh, about the cops. The cops. Sorry, I was
Because
going.
there have been various Boston cops that he's had relationships with.
Well, the issue over 39 books that he was writing is that Spenser became very friendly with all the cops, and part of the fun in the early novels is the friction, because cops don't necessarily like a private eye snooping around and getting in their crime scene and questioning the suspects and making a mess of things. And the tension there is what made those first several books a real delight. But over the years, Spenser not only, helped out, solve so many crimes that they thought, hey, he's pretty damn good at this. And then at one point, one of the stories, he actually saves the wife of Frank Belson,
Right.
Who's a sergeant, later a lieutenant in the books. And so it's hard to have any tension because the guys came so close. So I have a woman that is the new lieutenant who's running the homicide squad named Lorraine Glass, and she does not have time for Spenser's crap, and she is immune to his charms. She does not think he's funny, and she thinks a hindrance, and that kind of brought back the dynamics of those earlier books.
And which crime family do we have as a focus in this book?
Well, you always, again, because I knew this was going to be the 50th book, I kind of wanted to have have some Easter eggs in here for longtime fans. I don't think most of the people, you guys are really serious about this stuff, but I don't necessarily think the average reader gets any of this stuff. But in the first book was the character Joe Braz, who was kind of, he was really Whitey Bulger is who he was at that time. And so there's still remnants, his son in particular, who was in several Spenser books, is in this particular story too.
Now, some people have moved on. Not everybody is still with us.
Well, it was our friend Reed Coleman killed off Geno Fish.
Yes.
And
I know, and that's terrible because we have a whole Parker universe and more people than one right here.
There's not a lot of,
if one guy goes, it ripples across the entire universe, right? That's right. I always liked Geno Fish. It's such a great name among other things.
Geno Fish. Bob had the greatest names. That I spend more time thinking about certain names and the resonance of them and having them have that kind of Parker-esque sound.
And notice that they're short and punchy. He didn't go for long, complicated names.
No.
Fish, Hawk, Braz.
But super memorable, very, very memorable. Iconic. There's so many books you read and the characters are, I would say, throwaway characters. They're just chess pieces. We have John Smith and this guy, whatever it is. But Bob, just that great little sketches of those characters, and part of that was in naming them.
Did you ever read his PhD, his doctoral thesis?
I have not read it. No.
I haven't
know
either,
all
but
about
I've always meant to, because it was kind of a gateway to
oh, sure, and it was all
this.
about his what you mentioned earlier, which is the Western hero, the gunslinger who just moved into the city. And that's how he ended up going all the way back around. I'm sure he talked about it in this very space.
Yep.
He came back around to writing Westerns because that's where it all began. And I think that's absolutely true.
Speaking of which, there is going to be another, what's his name? Robert Knox, right?
Yeah.
Robert Knox is going to have a Cole and Hitchin, or Hitchin and Cole, whatever it is, this summer. I think it is. And for those of you wondering, Mike Lupica, who's been writing, or Lupica, I never can remember which way we say it, who's been writing Sonny Randall, and Jesse Stone is now going to write Spenser and Jesse Stone, and Allison Galen is going to be writing Sonny Randall. So there's kind of a whole
the books are going to continue. Yeah.
I miss Sonny. I was really glad when Mike came back because I thought Sonny was an interesting character, and then she kind of vanished there.
And I think there's going to be a lot. She was a very interesting character, and Bob kind of started that. But I think it was a really smart move to have Allison write that character, to actually have a woman writing the Sonny Randall books now. I think she'll bring something, another level to that. I think.
Right, but she has to inherit what Mike had written, because he only wrote, was it 7, Sonny? There weren't very many.
Not many, I don't know.
I think it was 7, and then Mike has written 2, I think.
I think So
maybe 3. Anyway, 2. Okay. So, there's that whole Parker dynamic, with the one woman, he can't live with or can't live without. We went through that with Jesse. Wasn't it Reed that finally got rid of Jesse Stone's, whatever her name was, that really annoying wife? Yeah, we all felt that. Jen, wasn't that her name? Jen? Yay, Jen is gone. But Sonny was going back and forth between Rick, what's his name?
in the Jesse Stone books.
No, in the Sonny Randall.
Oh, Richie, the husband,
But
ex-husband.
then Mike brought in somebody else, and
Yeah.
so that's been going back and forth, and so it'll be interesting to see what
Yeah,
Allison does with it.
absolutely. And
But,
now I can just read this stuff as a fan.
You
as
can,
well. Yeah.
right?
I've got too many of my own people to deal with. So
Well, there was
a lot
the
of thinking.
Parker. There was that loop of, I think it was 3 books where he and Susan, it was all falling apart, and then eventually he made a decision that Spencer and Susan would be solid.
yeah,
But he didn't give Jesse or Sonny, that kind of
sure.
maybe he just needed more books.
Yeah, and that was, as you well know, was a very personal storyline for Bob to follow during that time. So
Yes, it was indeed. Bob was totally devoted to Joan. One of the things I thought was so interesting, when I met Joan, she had breast cancer, and it had a double mastectomy. And both she and Bob elected for her not to have any reconstructive surgery. So, they didn't, either one of them.
that was
wanna
actually
bother with
that was probably, I can talk about this stuff now. We can talk freely about it. But that was the only time that I ever had any pushback on a storyline. Is actually Joan had written this book, she and Bob, about her time
Yeah.
with breast cancer. It's called 3 Weeks in Spring.
Right.
And at that time, it was something that was kind of taboo subject. A lot of people weren't talking about it.
Like
She was
Betty Ford.
Right. Yeah,
There
yeah.
were things we didn't
Yeah.
talk of. Now, of course, everybody's life, is in public.
But
display.
she wrote just, it's a really moving memoir. For anybody who's a Spencer fan should definitely read it. But I wanted to carry that over into the Spencer books, and I wanted, because so much in Spencer is so autobiographical for the Parkers, is to do a story about breast cancer with Susan. And I thought that this is something that, but that was the only time that I had pushback on. That's just too whatever. We don't want to do that.
Too personal.
And it's I had to remove it from a book, and I really wish I still was in it, because I felt it was a really very personal book and very true to the Parkers of what they had gone through.
Susan has very little presence in this book, which I thought
Yeah.
made sense.
She had a big role in the last one. So
She
you
had
kind
a
of
big role in the
yeah.
last one, and actually in is it the Sonny Randalls? Isn't Susan is Sonny's therapist, if I remember
right, yeah.
this right? So Mike decided to give us a view of Susan that
Yeah.
Spencer actually never did, which I thought was kind of
Mm.
fun too. Did you guys ever talk? I mean, or did you all just sort of do your own thing and hope it
You're talking about all the different the
Yeah.
other authors. No, I would hear from somebody. I'd hear from Reed, a very close friend of mine. He'd say, "Hey, I'm going to kill Geno Fish. What do you think?" And I said, "Kill the bastard," and
Geno Fish.
and there'd be a time where I'd heard from Mike, and Mike, when he came on, a few years ago, he said, "Hey, I really want to have Hawk in this story. I don't want to offend you. Is that okay? Can I use Hawk?" And I said, "Really?" I said, "That's not my decision to make." I said, "That's if you want to write in this, the Parker verse, you want to do that. That's you write that."
Yeah, but he can't kill.
But
Hawk
occasionally,
or,
but I told
maim him.
I sent Mike a message a few weeks ago. I just said, "Hey," I said, "I've left the coffee pot is on. There's a bottle of Old Forester in the desk at Berkeley and Boylston, and the lights are on and all paid, and I left the key under the door." So we've had a discussion about it.
It'll be interesting. Mike is an irrepressibly energetic and very funny guy, but he's a famous sports writer. He has years and years of sports writing,
Yeah.
and
The New York Daily News.
it'll be interesting to see
Yeah,
what his Spencer
sure.
will be like.
Yeah, and everyone's take is different.
Yeah. I know, but isn't it? You're also adaptable, right? You're still reading these. I mean, despite how it all changes, and I still am. I used to save up. See, I have to pace myself because I have like 200 or 300 arcs every month. I have to do something with, and so I have to stay in the month. If I leap ahead and grab something that looks fabulous in June, it just throws everything all up. right? So the way I used to pace myself is I would get a Robert Parker
Yeah.
advanced reading copy, and I would put it there on the shelf where it was sort of winking at me. And I would say, okay, if I get this many books, if I've
Yeah.
looked at this, then I can reward myself
Well, the
by
books were always,
reading. So he
yeah.
was, I mean, he really
Well,
was my
the
reward
books were
system.
just so delightful and so much fun.
And so fast.
They're so
You could
fast,
read
but
them so fast.
but I've said this many times. I'm in here, look at all the, God knows how many hero books and characters and
Yeah.
series and everything we've seen, everything. But I think the longevity of this series is that they're always fun. His books are always fun, and they're always funny. I mean, I can't right now. I just can't take reading a super depressing read or going through something that is just humorless. I think that's the worst, is reading a detective novel that has no humor in it. And Bob was extremely funny and had such a wry wit about him that I was the same way. I used to do book reviews when I worked at the paper in Florida, and anytime a Parker Galley came in, they knew that was mine. I was snagging it, and I didn't pace myself. I went right to it. Parker
he's the
and
real relief from like serial killers or really
Exactly.
dark and depressing tales.
Yeah.
There would be Bob, over there. You knew what you were going to get, but then there were always going to be a surprise,
Yeah.
and it was always going to be enormous fun. And not only at the moment as a society are we riven, and there's a lot of strange behavior going on. I don't understand why the passengers on the flight to Europe that an hour in turned around because this woman was misbehaving. If I'd been on the plane, I'd have had my duct tape ready. I would have duct taped that woman to that seat. I just can't believe that
I didn't see the story. This is the last
I can't
couple.
believe they didn't do. I think duct tape should be automatic equipment now for anybody in the cabin. I mean, imagine a whole
Well, I'm
flight
from-
to Europe, an hour out,
Hey,
turning around because there was this woman misbehaving.
Oh my gosh.
My God,
Yeah.
Right, I was going somewhere with it. Oh, I've forgotten. So what I was, recently, the New York Times Book Review has been like the iconic, review source and all, but they have taken such a deep dive into dark or socially conscious or, social agenda issues and so forth. I read one now and I think there's nothing there I want to read. It's really interesting, and I
think it's a fine balance. I think it's a fine.
Where are the people reading these books?
Yeah.
I mean, I see all of you, and you're here,
Right.
talking to us and all. And I think, who's buying and reading? I wonder if these are like the great unread bestsellers, because there have been a lot of them over the years. It looks like everybody's going, yay, and it's the top of the New York Times list, but many times those books, actually, nobody really has read them. It's like the Booker Prize books. Very few people have made it through all.
Barbara,
the
don't tell
Booker
anybody
Prize
that. I mean,
I
you
am
know
telling
all
you.
this. She's telling it the way it is.
I'm one of them. I just
It's the book, all those books that you want to keep on your bookshelf, but not necessarily read.
right.
But I think it's a fine balance. What Parker did so well, and I think that's what Chandler did, of course, effortlessly. And Ross MacDonald was the idea of, and God knows John D. MacDonald, was a social commentary. Holding up society to a mirror, but also understanding that there is a beacon of light within that, and that's goes all the way back to Chandler, and to have that our hero
Down
will
those
not.
mean streets.
That's it.
Yep.
That's
Whatever.
that's
How's
everything.
That go? Down those mean streets, a man must walk. How's that go? Patrick? Down those streets, a man must walk, and he must not be afraid, or whatever it all
Right.
is. Yeah, it was not himself mean. That's
Or
right.
tarnished.
Yeah. Right. I used to have that memorized because that whole Chandler thing was.
That's
amazing.
everything. That's where we all come from. It's just.
Right. And Bob, if you remember, wrote, was it 1, 2?
Two.
Chandler, Poodle Springs, and what was the other one?
Perchance to Dream.
Okay. And now I just saw Joe Ide has written. He's going to work.
There's been several of those
with Joe
books.
in a couple weeks where he's got a book. I haven't unfortunately read it yet. I really want to get to it, and I don't think it's a Philip Marlowe book. I think it's.
No, it's a Philip Marlowe.
Is
book.
it of Marlowe? Okay, I know.
Yeah, his estate is.
Have you read it yet?
Not yet. I'm embarrassed. I have a copy though.
I know. Patrick and I are both real fans of Joe's work, so I'm sure
Well.
we're pacing ourselves, right? Just like we told you.
Sure. Yeah.
Oh, Joe Ide, IDE. He writes the IQ series, and they're really wonderful. But he's done Parker and John Banville did a Chandler.
Which I tried to read, and I think it's hard for probably, I would say, although Lawrence Osborne apparently did a really great one. It's all about Marlowe in the 80s as an old man, and I've heard it's fantastic, and I need to get that one. I need to read it. But I tell you what, Parker's sequel, I guess it's Poodle Springs, was outstanding, and you really truly could not tell where Chandler left off. The second one sounded a little bit more like Spenser, just with a fedora on, but the first one that Bob did was just fantastic. I mean, it was just effortless.
I'm trying to remember, what is the name of the Irish story? Is it All Our Yesterdays?
Yes,
Isn't
with
that the
Irish
one
Cop.
about-
That was Bob's biggest.
It was a really interesting book.
Yeah, I think he was frustrated that it didn't get more attention because it's a multi-generational story about Irish cops in
Right.
Boston, and it was a big sprawling epic, and I don't think it got, as the serious attention that Bob expected it to because he had written detective stories, and I think he
Right.
got kind of shunned by that. Probably a little disappointed by that, but terrific book. Yeah.
Right.
It was just outstanding.
So, what are you planning to do now that you
I'm on
and
vacation.
Spencer are?
I'm taking a break. Been doing 2 books a year now for a decade,
That's
so
right,
I'm going
you
to take a
have
little. Yeah, I'm going to drink some margaritas and hang out at the beach. I can't be idle. I'm working on a new book right now, and continuing my Quinn Colson books. I mean, I know this is shocking to you. There's no shortage of, rascals and criminals and corruption down south. So
No.
I know you're absolutely blown away by that. But I have somebody asked me a question last night when I was in Houston. Said, doing this for 10 years, have you learned things that you take with you to what you write? And I have read Parker not just as over and over again,
Right.
not just a few times or casually, but poured over every bit and detail of all of these books, all the Spenser books. And there is so much that I have learned by reading those books. I could do 1,000 dissertations on them at this point, but I take things that I've that have impressed me about iconic characters and the longevity and the lasting nature of Spenser, and try to bring those into my own stories. So not only has it been a very fun gig to have. Not only has it been very rewarding meeting fans and people are very excited that Spenser's continued, but I think my own series has taken bits and
Evolved
pieces, has
from
evolved
it.
from working on these books. Yeah.
Are you thinking of doing something other than Quinn Colson, or are you just sort
I
of
don't have any-
mulling it all over at the moment?
No, I'm deep into a project right now that I guess is more akin to some of the true crime books that I wrote 10 years ago, based on actual events and true stories. And so I'm into a really interesting case right now, and something I'm very proud of, and a book that I've been wanting to write for quite some time, but I didn't have the time because
Right.
I'm writing for the Parkers. And this will allow me to do more, Ace Atkins projects. And but then I'll go back to a Quinn Colson, and then probably a balance between a series and a standalone.
I forgot to say before we open it up to questions that one fun thing in here is that how there were other guys besides Hawk that became, part of the Spenser, whatever, especially in the one here in Arizona where, like all 7 of them show up. And
It was a great book.
I love that book,
Pot-
right? I
Pot
mean,
Shot.
it's the 7 Samurai or, whatever. But anyway, one of them in this book is really great. And I like the way you handled it with him. So he has his own story in this book, which is really a lot. I'm not telling you.
You got to read the book.
Sorry,
Just so you
I'm
don't know.
very carefully
There's
not
a
saying.
surprise guest, but
Yes, there is.
I think for longtime fans, I wanted to give people a little treat, and just having little Easter eggs and bringing back some characters, and with the Braz family and all that. But it's been, like I said, it's been a fun journey, and then just getting to meet Joan Parker and getting to know
Right.
Boston and all that. It's just was a wonderful experience.
So any of you know how this works? When somebody dies and then or decides to invite people into, well, as many authors as I can, I give this advice. One thing I think every author should decide is whether they want their work to stop when they stop, whether they just stop writing or leave us sadly for higher pastures, or whether they're okay with somebody else continuing their work, because that's really become a thing. And to do that, you have to have a literary estate. I mean, you need a literary executor ideally, but not every author's work can be turned into this kind of a situation.
Right.
But Bob wanted to look after Joan and look after his son, so it was fine with him if the work continued. Clive Cussler, as you know, was, our guy for 30 years. His family was involved in it all. So, he'd already brought in co-authors and all, and that is continuing, which I think is great. But I'm not so happy with the decision of Sue Grafton's family to do, film or movie Kinsey, because I know Sue didn't want to do that, but Sue didn't, in fact, it would seem to me, have a literary estate. And, one where she had laid out her wishes and had somebody carry them out. So
I think at some point the key of anytime you're taking on a character, especially somebody who's beloved as Spenser, is that you get somebody who loves this stuff and really respects it and is not doing it just because it's a gig. Look, I would never, I'll tell you this right now, I would not write for any other author I could give a damn about. You could not pay me millions of dollars to write for James Patterson or whatever. But I love this character, and I grew up with this character, and this character informed, choices I made about becoming a newspaper reporter and writing crime fiction. And I actually came to Robert Parker before I came to Hammett and Chandler. So he just meant so much to me that I wanted to do this. So I think that's the key of doing it successfully. It's not just hiring a gun for hire to come in and take over a series or anything, but to get somebody who really deeply cares about it. And hopefully that's what readers have seen, that I've got great sincerity when I take this on.
no question, but my point is, he couldn't just do that. Bob's dead, so now I, Ace, am going to, going to write Spenser. You can't, Bob owned those copyrights. His family owns those copyrights.
Oh, you're talking about people that just thought anyone can just do things.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. I would occasionally get. You think that's kind of obvious, but it's not.
No, it's not.
Is occasionally I would get messages from people that say, "I can't believe that you're trying to profit off the Robert Parker's name, and you've just stolen these characters, and how could you do?" And they don't understand that I am Spenser for hire. I was hired by the Robert B. Parker family.
That's
I was
right.
personally hired by and chosen by Joan Parker. That's why I do it. But it was funny there. I'll go even one further. There was some guy apparently on Amazon just started publishing Sonny Randall books, and then the Parker family had to just shut him down. But he thought he could just do that kind of thing.
Right.
The only one that I wish that they had done a cease and desist on was the Spenser Confidential movie, which I had absolutely nothing to do with.
Right.
Absolutely. And I got more hate mail, more loads, and luckily it was electronic email. If it had been physical mail, they would have had to back up a truck, which I had absolutely, even though they based it on one of my books, nothing to do with it. But it was a terrible representation of these wonderful characters.
So just to continue, there is an editor who oversees what's going to happen if somebody else starts writing in one of these universes, and he's the conduit, or she, as the case may be, between the family or whoever owns the copyrights to the material and the author, the Spenser for hire. So, it is, it's not just a freelance project, it's very reasonably controlled. So there's a Robert Ludlum universe, you probably noticed. There's a Tom Clancy Senior and Junior universe. There's, the Cussler universe. There's the Spenser universe. God knows how many others. And I think you'll see more of that because readers don't like losing characters. And, I think we're going to probably see more. But there's one guy in particular at Ace's publisher who oversees a lot of these estates, and we see people coming and going in them. It's it's been true in the Clancys.
Sure.
There's a new guy coming in to write one of the Cusslers. It's an evolving kind of a thing.
Yeah. Since I've been writing Spenser, I've been doing this 10 years. There've been 3 different writers doing Jesse Stone.
Right.
So.
Yep. Anyway, do you all have questions? Anybody like to ask a question?
You mentioned the Spenser Confidential movie.
No, God, I don't. You can't see. I don't have a drink up here with me.
I noticed in the last Spenser, Someone to Watch Over Me.
Yes.
You got a little jab in.
Of course.
Yeah.
Can
you talk about that? What you remember that?
Well, I think I can't remember the exact line. I know that there was something in the L.A. book, which was Angel Eyes, that was something about a sleazy producer who was working on an adaptation with the Wahlberg family and something, and Spenser says, "Well, I hope that project is better than the last one." And so, I don't think it was Wahlberg's fault fault. I think he's a fine actor. I think he probably could have done a great Spenser. I think it was just an awful script. I think that if he had been presented with a script that resembled the Spenser we know and love,
Yeah.
which is really timeless, I think he could have been great. He could have been a great. Oh, good for you. Yeah, I watched the whole thing only one time.
Book, Angel Eyes?
Angel, I think it's an Angel.
The movie guy,
There may have been more than one jab in the book. So.
Angel Eyes is talking, the movie guy says something about, if we did your life, we'd have to have you younger, and you have to be just getting out of prison.
Yeah, that's right. That was an Angel Eyes.
Spencer just says, whatever.
Change, do whatever you want to.
Christina, did you have a question?
Since you knew this was your last Spenser novel, what was that experience like?
Well, I tried to asking about it since I knew this was the last. A good question. And I did know that this was going to be the last one. In fact, I wasn't really sure if the one before this was going to be the last one. And but I really wanted to kind of go out and I collect all these. I'm a book collector as well, as you know. And I thought about how the books would look, and I thought 10 would look great if I had the 10.
9.
Yeah, if I had those right there, it just looked perfect.
Right. And 50 is better than 40.
That's right. I wanted to do the 50th book, and but I tried. I wanted some callbacks in the story, just some things like some of the characters we mentioned earlier, but I didn't necessarily write it as an ending. What I really wanted to do is go out and probably work harder on this book than I would have if I had not known it was the last. I wanted this one to go off on a real high note and for fans to really like it, and that was it. But I had no intention of drawing any type of conclusion to the stories or any type of concluding of my era or anything like that. I just really wanted this to be a really fun, old-fashioned Spenser book. And I was really drawn to those books like Looking for Rachel Wallace, what else did we talk about earlier?
Mortal Stakes.
Mortal Stakes, those kind of books. And it is a little bit of a thinner book. And I think it was kind of written in that type of style that really I felt were the strongest Parker books. But more than anything, I just wanted to, go on a high note and have a lot of fun
And
with
you
it.
didn't want Mike Lupica chasing you with an axe.
I did Deep Six the series right before,
right.
Yeah.
Or, like killed off Hawk or something. What am I going to do? No.
Yeah, don't give up the idea of the book.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I
You
don't,
came in on a high note.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
you could go out now.
that's
That's very
right. Well,
true.
thank you. Thank you very much.
Yep. Anybody else?
Yes, sir.
I know that you're a fan of 70s movies.
Oh, yeah.
Culture and stuff. You were just talking about, continuations. Do you think a good guilty pleasure would be Ace Atkins writing like a Nick Carter book or a Mac Bolan book or a Don Pendleton? I think you could write the hell out of one of those.
I think I would probably be more inclined to do it if it was a screenplay as opposed to a book. And I think those books are fun, especially of that era, but they aren't necessarily very well written books. And so I think that would be more of a chore than anything. But I would, that would be fun to write as a script or something like that, especially of that time. I had actually written a script for a Spenser movie. Nobody knows about this. I had written a script, and you know what it was? It was the Godwalk Manuscript. And so actually my wife and I sat down and we wrote a whole film based on the Godwalk Manuscript. And it was set in 1973. And it was 1973 Boston. And it was very gritty, and it was of the time. And but they whoever ended up, they wanted something flashy and modern and doing all this stuff. And I don't want to say that's not exactly fair to say modern, because I've heard that many times when they're talking about doing that new Spenser movie, that it modernized Spenser. Well, that's a bunch of crap, because the truth of Spenser is that he is timeless and classic. And that's what Parker's genius is, that he created characters that resonate through each decade. Go to the 70s, 80s, 90s. The two.
Right.
Yeah.
As the Korean War
Yeah.
moved forward.
Well,
Vietnam, and then it went
but
to
in the
Strand,
in the TV series, Spenser was a Vietnam vet, so they tweaked it a little bit, but it didn't matter. I think to some characters, that experience mattered, but I think they just changed that for the time frame. I think it was important that he had been a soldier. I think that was the key part of it.
I have a question for you, Patrick, that occurred to me when you asked that question. Does the term pulp fiction, is pulp a pejorative, or does it just refer to the fact that they were published in magazines?
What do you all think? I think maybe a little bit of both.
Is there always a slightly,
I would say it's a little bit. I think for
slightly down class kind
I
of
think
a
people
thing?
who don't know books would use the term pulp as a derogatory term. They'd say, "Oh, that's a pulp book," or that's what. But as I was talking to Patrick earlier, I collect pulp William Faulkner, and that was just based on the type of paperback that was being produced with
Right.
very, lurid covers and it. But there's nothing, downgrading about William Faulkner. It's just that type of book. So I think that people who don't really know books would use pulp as a derogatory term, but I think it's just the quality of the paper and the quality of the
Yeah, it was
particular
terrible
edition.
paper. I know. I mean, to be pulped, it was wood pulp, right?
Yeah.
Exactly, and not holding up.
There's that disposable connotation, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
There's somebody on watching online, Tony, who he says really love Quinn Coulson, Nick Travers series. Your characters are fantastic. Who influenced you becoming a writer?
Who influenced Ace becoming a writer, if you couldn't hear the question?
Great question. Well, I think that for sure, Robert B. Parker, Elmore Leonard, who I knew very well, was a wonderful guy. I know he used to come to John D. McDonald, Ross
Before
McDonald.
Reacher,
Yeah.
if
all
you,
these
if you
guys.
go back to John D. McDonald in, I'm sorry, what's his name?
Travis McGee.
Thank you, Travis McGee. He was another guy with no memory. Every Travis McGee was like a complete reset. And that I think that's a really,
Yeah.
it's if you can come up with a character like that, you can really do brilliantly.
I think that the Travis McGee books, unfortunately, have been kind of lost in the
Yeah.
shuffle because of many of the books falling out of print. And I think
Yeah.
that there was not the carryover. McDonald died in 1987, and I think they just were not continually.
There was an
But I wouldn't
editor-
want to see. I necessarily would not want to
Yeah,
see a new one.
There was an editor at Ballantine who might have been in the 90s. Anyway, she worked hard to bring all the Travis McGee's back.
Oh, that's great.
All the colors, it was turquoise and orange and,
Yeah,
on
and
and on
I
and on.
imagine the whole store has read those books. But
There's not a lot of incentive for publishers to, when an author is gone,
yeah,
and then if there's no literary estate, gradually the books begin to disappear because there's not a new book creating a demand for the older books. And the two things that help with that, are digital books because, they don't really cost anything once they're set up, and print on demand, which allows single copies to
Sure.
be made. But some publishers, unfortunately, have priced the print on demand paperbacks to like $29.95 or something. It's just ridiculous. And I think it's too bad. I mean, if I had unlimited time and resources, I would reprint all the old
Yeah.
books that I like that
oh
you can't
yeah,
buy
and
anymore.
there's great series. Was it the Hardman series that from the 70s that Lee Goldberg ended up bringing back out? These are these lost kind of pulpy
Yeah.
books, detective books from everyone's forgotten about. But they had a major publisher back in the day. But kind
I
of
would
there's so
bring
many
back
books.
William Tapley. I would bring back Philip Craig's. But I mean, there's so many really wonderful series that
Yeah.
you guys can't read right now because there's no economic incentive for
And a lot of
keeping them going.
And I'm trying to remember the name of that. There's just a million of those series that we remember Travis McGee, we remember Spencer, we remember. Yeah,
Yeah, the 87th Precinct books, which were true.
Are those out of print? Those are probably out of print now. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wish as booksellers that we had more space and more time to encourage you to read some of these classics, and start, I don't know, maybe one of these days I'll
Yeah. Well, one of the wonderful.
spend a month,
Yeah.
trying to encourage everybody to read.
Well, in some ways, these books are so great because, again, what the great thing about crime fiction is not only visiting these cities, getting to know about these cities, but they're great time capsules and great
Yeah.
snapshots. And if you want to
Sure.
learn about 1970s Boston, go back to those early Parker books, and every little detail is just like a
They
like
absolutely
a
do.
snapshot.
They document
Oh, yeah.
places and times for us, but but it's in a lot more fun way than if you're reading nonfiction, for
Exactly.
example.
I mean, for sure.
You bet. Thanks for coming.
Do you remember Freddie the Pig?
Freddie the Pig. Yeah.
Yeah, do you remember that? Freddie the Pig, when I was out, it was a detective series. Freddie the Pig was a detective, check it out.
That sounds like a good name for Freddie the Pig sounds like a good name for a criminal in Boston. If I was writing
Yeah, Well, not any different than Gino Fish.
That's
Come
true.
on.
Freddie
you
the
know,
Pig,
there
Gina
we are.
Fish. There we go.
So if nobody has any more questions, perhaps you would like Ace to sign books for you. So
Great.
thank you, Ace.
Thank
very
you,
much.
Barbara. Thanks so much.
Oh,
Appreciate it.
really a pleasure. We'll clean out the chairs. If Ace would like to move behind himself to that little table, we'll move the chairs out of the way and you can visit with him. You bet. It was really a joy to talk to you.